Hello and welcome to today's episode. I am your host Henrik, and this is another 10-minute guide with us here at Fantasy North. Today we're painting tabletop non-metallic metal. For today's episode, we're gonna need a medium-sized brush, preferably a wet palette. I strongly recommend getting a painting handle, as well as these colors. Now, before we get started, let's talk some about priming. I've prepared these today by giving them a zenithal highlight with Wraithbone. What that means is basically that I first primed in black from all angles, especially from below, waited for it to dry properly, and gave him a spray straight from above with just a tap or two of Wraithbone, giving him a lot of natural shadows. That makes him easier to work with. Let's get started. We're gonna start out by applying Basilicanum Grey. Apply it carefully over the model as you would any contrast paint, but don't worry too much about it pooling a bit towards the lower part of the models and in crevices and such. It's actually gonna add to the non-metallic effect later on. And that's the Basilicanum all done. Next up, it's the Volupus Pink. What you'll want to do is cover the pants, the torso, and the upper arms with this color. But make sure you don't cover any of the leather straps on the armor and the belt. Cover it carefully as you would any other contrast paint. Next up, one of my favorite colors, the Wildwood. This is for the belt and all the straps and such, everything that's supposed to be leather on the model. Be really neat when you use this one, as it will really ruin the other colors if you aren't careful. Next up is another one of my favorite colors, namely Black Templar. We're gonna use it to paint the boots and the gloves, to give it a bit of a different feel and also introducing some turquoise into the model. And finally, I guess my favorite contrast paint, Flesh Show Red. We're gonna use this for the haft of the axe. And that's all the contrast paints done for now, so we're gonna move on to a base paint, namely XV88. This is a yellowish brown that works really well for painting yellow, but also gold non-metallic metal. So color all the parts of the models with XV88 that you want to be gold later on. As you can see, I've painted the eyes and lenses of the model Wraithbone. This is so we can paint it turquoise. We're gonna use Aethermatic Blue as the contrast for this. Turquoise and magenta are two colors that go really well with each other. Almost a meme in my local community that pink and turquoise or magenta and turquoise is the painting meta. The entire model is now covered in paint. There should be no white dots anywhere. If you find any, make sure you fill them in. And that's the model at an acceptable tabletop level at most tournaments. However, we're gonna bring it just a little bit higher in quality. So bring out your wet palette and let's start with stage 2. Next up, we're gonna start mixing Wraithbone and Basilicanum Grey together. This is where the wet palette comes in really handy. Basically, what you're looking for is adding them together about 50-50, so one part each. What's really important is, since we mixed in Basilicanum into the Wraithbone as a pigment, it will be the same tone as the contrast paint that we added to the armor. You want to paint the shiny part of any object, so any sharp edge and any round area or any cylinder. If you find it hard to do yourself, just Google the model with non-metallic metal and try to copy someone else who's done it. It's how I learned where all the light spots are supposed to be. If you're painting an Arcanaut, you could really just follow along this guide, and I mean, it doesn't have to look perfect for the non-metallic metal on a tabletop level. Now I've lined the axe with pure wraithbone, but as you can see it becomes a bit too sharp. For example, if I add a dot onto the shoulder pad, it becomes really sharp. So what you want to do is add just a tiny bit of Basilicanum Grey to the wraithbone. I would say about 80% wraithbone and 20% Basilicanum, and it becomes way smoother. This transition is, well, you'll have maybe to do a bit of trial and error to get it right. What you want to do is add a even finer highlight to the areas that you highlighted in the previous step. You can really see in this stage that the metal starts to pop, and we're tricking the brain into thinking that it's actually shiny. We could stop here, but I like to use just a little bit of pure wraithbone to pick out all the details. It really makes the metal pop that little bit extra. We're gonna take pure Basilicanum Grey and use it to glaze over any like sharp transitions and make the darker parts of the metal even darker. It really adds some effect to the axe, which we're gonna start with. So as you can see, I'm first placing the paint onto the model like that. But it becomes like really sharp, so clean your brush and then start pulling the paint down towards the lighter part of the models to make it transition from bright to dark, but let it be a bit thicker where the dark parts are supposed to be. There's a whole science behind painting sharp edges on weapons and such, so as you can see it has a special effect on it which makes it look different from the other metal. Next up, we're gonna highlight the gold. We're gonna use Sameshi Desert. So basically you wanna do about the same technique as you did with the mixed Basilicanum and Wraithbone, but on the gold this time. Shoulder's a bit tricky, so line the outside of the shoulder and then add a round shape in the upper corner that sort of is the same shape as the shoulder pad. And then the cylinder on the back, you basically just make a straight line. Next up, we're gonna use Wraithbone again to bring it to the same top highlight as we did on the grey metal, making, I don't know, it just makes the model more harmonic using the same final highlight. So highlight the Sameshi Desert the same way as you did before on the Basilicanum. Using the same technique as we did with Basilicanum, use your snakebite leather and shade down the gold parts of the armor. Basically where it's supposed to be dark or any transition that isn't smooth enough, you add a bit of snakebite. It gives the armor a really dark brown finish in the dark recesses. So any part that's supposed to be darker, you make darker. And then we're gonna finish eyes. So basically you add a tiny drop of Achillean green in the top right corner, and then you finish it off with the tiniest white dots where it's at the darkest part of the eyes, like that. And that's all the non-metallic metal done on the model. But I do feel that the model is a bit incomplete without finishing up the magenta and the black gloves and boots. So part 2 of the guide, I guess. And to bring a bit more turquoise in the model, use Stegadon to highlight all the Black Templar parts of the model. Then we highlight all the Stegodon parts with Temple Guard Blue. And then finally, a really thin highlight with Blue Horror. Just all those sharp edges. The magenta cloth looks fine, but in order to make it just pop a little bit more, we're gonna first layer it with Screamer Pink in a highlight fashion, and then we're gonna make a lot of small lines in it using Pink Horror, giving it sort of textured feel. And that's all for today. Remember to like and subscribe and leave me a comment below on what guide you would like to see in the future. See you next time.